welcome to this webinar on concrete visions for a sustainable future. This will be a discussion with Jennifer Hinton, who is an ecological economist and sustainability researcher. And she is currently working as a researcher at Stockholm University's Department of Economic History and International Relations. And my name is Cecilia Paulsson, and I work in the project Scenario 2030, which is a project that is funded by Allmänna arvsfonden and is a part of the theater Teater K in Katrineholm, who is the founder of this project. And this is also, we are co-arranging this webinar together with Fältbiologerna. And joining us today from Fältbiologerna is Axel Eriksson. You can say hi to the audience, just a few words.
I'm Axel from Fältbiologerna, as you said.
Yes, and also we will have a participant from Scenario 2030, Ellen Eriksson, who will also be joining us and asking questions to Jennifer. You can also say hi.
Yes, hello everyone, welcome.
Yes, so I'll say a little bit more about us. So Scenario 2030 is, as I said, a project, a 3-year project, and the goal is to reach young people between 15 to 25, and we have a lot of workshops, but we're also going to do a film. So I'm employed as a filmmaker in the project, and we're also going to do a book. But the main purpose is the workshops, and to get the young people to have more visions about the future and how we can have a sustainable future and an economy that can, without depleting all the resources of our planet. And yes, before we start, I just want to tell a little bit more about some things that will happen later, so that if you're interested and if you think this is interesting, there's some other things that you can join later. So this is part of a webinar series. We will have 3 webinars during the spring, and the following one will be in March 3rd. And it will be about participatory economics with Anders Sandström. That will be in Swedish. And so you can have a look in our social media. You will find information about that. And we are also soon starting a new workshop series that will be online. It starts on the February 22nd. It's called Bortom kapitalismen, Beyond Capitalism. So it's a creative workshop series about how to create a real sustainable future. And you can find information on our Facebook and our website, scenario2030.se. Yes, that's all I'm going to say now. So now I'm going to give the word to Jennifer, who is going to do a presentation first, and then we will come in with questions after this presentation. And also the audience who are watching out there on Facebook, you're also allowed to just write any questions in as comments, and we will get to them a bit later on. We will start adding some questions from the audience as well. Okay, so welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much to Scenario 2030 and to Fältbiologerna for having me tonight as part of this series. I think it's a really cool series of events that you guys are hosting, and a really important series, so I'm honored to be part of it. And yeah, so I am just gonna jump in there. So I've got a 15-minute presentation before we go into discussion, and I'm just gonna jump in because 15 minutes is not a lot of time to talk about a different economic paradigm. So I am sharing my slides now. If you can't see them, maybe Sia or Aylin can let me know. So I will be in this next 15 minutes, in the next hour, talking about this not-for-profit world model, which is a model of a not-for-profit market economy beyond capitalism, actually, and beyond economic growth. You can find out more about all of these ideas on my website, this www.relationshiptoprofit.net. There's a lot more resources there. And I'll just jump in now. And actually, I'm going to time myself so I don't go over. So I'm going to start with a bold claim, and that is that not-for-profit forms of business have the potential to systemically transform the economy for sustainability. And so you might be wondering, like most people, what is a not-for-profit business? So not-for-profit business is different from for-profit forms of business. Most of us are used to thinking about business only as for-profit. But there are actually not-for-profit businesses, and they're different in really important ways for sustainability. So they're different in terms of purpose, ownership, and investment. And so first, if we take for-profit business, and this is really the difference between for-profit and not-for-profit is a legal difference. These are two different legal structures. So here I'm talking about legal differences. And so the purpose embedded in for-profit business structures is financial gain. So traditionally it's to make their owners rich, right? To make their owners and investors rich. And now the last few years, we're seeing more and more business structures that also add social benefit onto that, but still the core purpose is financial gain. And in support of that purpose, ownership is structured in a way that the financial rights are private. So private owners have the right to take the profit and the assets from the business. That's what a financial right is, the right to the profit of the business. So private owners can take the profit in order to get rich. And that means that their returns on investment are unlimited. So as long as the money, or as long as the business is making a profit, there's no upper limit legally to how much money owners and investors can make from a for-profit business in terms of receiving the profits and dividends of the business. And so if we compare that to not-for-profit businesses, it's really different in very important ways. So first, with the purpose, not-for-profit businesses can only have a social benefit purpose. They can't have a financial gain purpose. And so in order to serve that, when I talk about social benefit, there's a large range of things that can qualify as a social benefit purpose, all the way from helping people who are facing homelessness, to making sure kids have healthy food, to protecting ecosystems, so cleaning a beach or protecting a forest. And so in service of that social benefit purpose, there are no private financial rights. So I call them collective financial rights. But the important thing to know here is that all of the profit, so all of the surplus money that a business, a not-for-profit business makes, has to go back into that social benefit mission. It can't be distributed to private owners legally. Oops. And so what that means in terms of investment is there are limits on how much you can get back from your investment in these businesses. So you can make a little bit of money, but you can't make unlimited amounts of money because you can only get back some of the interest on a loan you give this business. And often people don't get any return, financial return, but the returns are more social and ecological for this investment. And so here's an example to make this more concrete for you. So this is a not-for-profit real estate business in Australia called Home Ground Real Estate. And their core social benefit purpose is to help people facing homelessness. but they don't rely on charity and grants and donations like traditional nonprofits. They run a business. And so they sell and manage properties like homes or commercial properties. And all of the profit, all of the extra money they make from that goes back to helping people like this woman, Rachel here, who says, you know, homegrown real estate gave me the ability to move on with my life after being homeless for over 1.5 years. So that's just to give you an idea of how these businesses really operate. And then we found them in every sector of the economy and all over the world. So that's where the idea of what if we could have an entirely not-for-profit market economy? What if not-for-profit businesses could replace for-profit businesses, or for-profits can become not-for-profit? And so, you know, right now we live in a global economy that is predominantly for-profit. So it's made up mostly of for-profit types of business. And it's really important to note that, you know, on the business level, this kind of business is cool, but the reason that I'm interested in it in the first place is because I think that it has system-wide implications, because dominant business structures drive system-wide dynamics. So if we have a predominantly for-profit economy now, that's going to have different dynamics than a predominantly not-for-profit economy. And so let's look at this. How do those dynamics work? Well, if we imagine an entirely for-profit economy, you know, our economy today is not entirely for-profit, it's mostly for-profit. But, you know, just to try to identify these dynamics, let's imagine an entirely for-profit economy. So all of the businesses in this market are seeking private financial gain to make their owners rich. And I'm going to take you through this analysis using these system thinking diagrams that we call causal loop diagrams, because it enables us to keep track of a lot of different variables and dynamics within a complex system in a fairly easy way, actually. So all of these arrows just mean that there's a causal connection. So for instance, the desire for financial gain drives investment, which drives production. And the plus signs here mean that the variables go in the same direction. So if the desire for financial gain increases, then investment will increase. But at the same time, if the desire for financial gain decreases, then investment will decrease. And then the last thing to know here is this R means that there's a reinforcing feedback loop. So, you know, there's this feedback loop where if it is left to its own devices, this system will continue to just grow and grow faster and faster all the time, or decline and decline faster all the time. Okay, so this first little diagram is the story that you'll find in any mainstream economics textbook, basically. So basically, you know, the desire for financial gain or the profit motive drives investment, which drives production, which allows for more sales, which leads to more profit. And so some of that profit's going to get reinvested into this production cycle. But at some point, some of that profit is going to get distributed to owners, because this economy exists, or the main purpose of this economy is to make owners rich, this financial gain purpose. And so some of that profit will be distributed to owners, and they might reinvest that. But of course, I'm looking at this from a sustainability interest, from a sort of critical perspective, asking, okay, what does this mean for people and the planet? And the first thing to note is that all of this production and all of these sales have environmental impacts and create environmental damage through the use of resources, the mining that happens, the carbon emissions, and the disposal of products and services and waste that happens throughout here. Another thing to notice is that we're not all just natural consumers who mindlessly want more and more products all the time, but rather businesses have to use advertising to prompt us or convince us to buy more stuff. And that's a very effective profit-seeking strategy, which is why we're surrounded by advertising. And so more advertising leads to more sales. And then companies also increasingly use a profit-seeking strategy that I call planned obsolescence, or it's not just me, but it's called planned obsolescence, wherein companies design products and services to become obsolete or useless before they actually need to be. So if you think of your mobile phone or your laptop, or even maybe the jeans you're wearing, they have been designed so that you will have to buy a new one pretty soon, sooner than you would have had to maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. And of course that drives more sales too, because if my mobile phone stops working, I have to buy a new one. Or maybe a used one, hopefully. So this is what I call the feedback loop of consumerism. And this is basically the engine of economic growth, but of course also the engine of environmental damage, and also some social damage here with the advertising and planned obsolescence. At the same time, over time, owners are going to accumulate all of this wealth they're getting from the profit of the businesses, because again, the main purpose and the definition of success in this system is financial gain, to have more and more money. And so they'll accumulate more money, have the ability to invest in more equity. And I call that the wealth accumulation feedback loop. At the same time, there is a built-in incentive for-profit businesses to keep wages as low as possible, because wages, to pay workers is a key cost of doing business. And so there we see, a minus sign. These minus signs start coming in where there are trade-offs. So the higher the wages, the less profit, or the lower the wages, the more profit. And so we're seeing, wages being suppressed, and there's been the International Labor Organization talks about the state of the global economy as being wage suppressed. And these two pressures of wealth accumulation in the hands of the owners and wage suppression for workers leads to growing inequality that we're seeing. And often the proposals for more sustainability, to resolve these environmental problems and inequality are to tax companies more and tax their owners more, and make stronger regulations to protect the environment and workers. But it's really important to acknowledge that this for-profit economy also has a built-in incentive for businesses and their owners to influence policy in a way that will allow them to keep making more money. And so they lobby for subsidies, they lobby for tax breaks, and they lobby against regulations that might cost them money. It might protect workers and the environment, but it would cost them money. And this is called political capture by a lot of people. I got it from an Oxfam report, actually. And so here we have three key dynamics of the for-profit economy that come from this for-profit structure: consumerism, inequality, and political capture. And now I only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to go straight to the not-for-profit type of economy. So if we imagine a market economy in which all of the businesses are not-for-profit, like that home-ground real estate I showed you, where they're seeking only social benefit and they have no private owners accumulating wealth, we see a very different kind of economy with different dynamics here. So we have the desire for social benefit guiding investment and profit now. There's not the desire for financial gain in the driver's seat, and of course, financial gain means there's never enough. You always want more. Whereas the desire for social benefit can have some feedback here, where, for instance, if we invest and put profit into environmentally beneficial activities, and we reduce environmental damage by, for instance, protecting a forest, then it sort of signals over time, that we don't have to keep investing more and more in protecting this forest. We've had enough protection now, so we can just stay at the same level. And what this means is that this is a system that doesn't constantly have to grow the way that a for-profit economy does in order to feed this desire for financial gain. Instead, this is an economy that can be compatible with enough, with a level of enough, which is really important for meeting everyone's needs within the planetary boundaries. So there's still the potential here for consumerism and too much production and sales, but there's also not an inherent drive to keep growing production and sales in order to deliver profit to owners. So that's really important. And really important to notice is also that there aren't private owners accumulating wealth, and there's no inherent incentive to suppress wages. Instead, all of this surplus and investment is going to socially beneficial activities, which might alleviate inequality, and environmentally beneficial activities. And so the dynamics of a not-for-profit type of economy are really different. We see more equality, investment responding to social and environmental needs, potential for less consumerism, which would allow for more well-being and less environmental destruction, and sustainability interventions can be more effective because regulations and taxes for sustainability would better align with that social benefit purpose. Okay, so I just want to wrap up. I know I've gone a few seconds over time, but I'm going to wrap up by saying I see the not-for-profit economy as necessary for sustainability, but not sufficient. So we also need a culture of sufficiency. We need the economy to be circular, ecological regeneration, and social justice. But at least the not-for-profit economy expands the horizons of possibility for the economy beyond this dichotomy of either capitalism or the state-planned economy. A not-for-profit market economy is neither of those. So that's exciting to me. And I'll just say thank you. And again, you can check out my website if you want more information about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for an interesting short introduction. Of course, if you want to know more about this after this, there are multiple places where you can find more information about your model. But now we're going to dive into a couple of questions. And and as I said before, you're very welcome to ask questions in the comments. The people who are watching this. So I just want to start with one question, which is when you talk about social benefit, I'm just wondering, like, if we would live in a not-for-profit economy, who would decide what the definition is of social benefit, and like, would there be like, and do you have like some kind of definition? Because I was thinking that could differ a lot. How these companies would work, etc.
Yeah, no, and it's a really important question, and it's actually one of the reasons that I ended up going down this line of research, and I got so inspired by working on this model, is because we don't have to start from scratch. The not-for-profit structure already exists and it's all over the world. And so social benefit is already defined for the not-for-profit structure in every government that we've checked. And I've checked this with the International Nonprofit Law Center. And so it's already defined. It varies a little bit from country to country, but it's the government that defines what counts for social benefit or not. There's lots of legal documentation that each government has about what can qualify as a social benefit or not, and it tends to be fairly intuitive. So one time I got asked the question, somebody was playing devil's advocate and said, what if a white supremacist group wanted to start a not-for-profit business and their social mission was to spread white supremacy? And I said, well, it's hard to imagine a government that would allow for that. Certainly, currently, no government would allow for that to be a valid social benefit mission. And so it would, if that fits into a government social benefit mission definition, then you would have even bigger problems, I think, because you've got a Nazi fascist state going on. So.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to give the word to Ellen to ask one of your questions.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, how can for-profit organizations play a role and contribute to a better business environment in such, like both in society that is today and onwards?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that's one of the things that this model highlights, is that it's really difficult for well-intentioned for-profit businesses and even not-for-profit businesses to compete in these for-profit dynamics that we have right now. And so, they're sort of swimming against some really strong currents. There's another dynamic that I didn't have time to go into here, but that's the market concentration dynamic, where investment, because investment is made for a high return on your investment, and you're trying to get as much money as possible, then you invest in the most profitable looking companies, and those are often the largest companies. So the largest companies are attracting more investment. That allows them to buy up smaller companies, that allows them to outcompete smaller companies in a lot of ways, and also more sustainable companies, I might say, because it's actually a lot more expensive to act sustainably. And so that's where we see this market concentration that we have now, where so much of the market is concentrated in the hands of a few companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon. We can see it all around us, right? So that's one reason actually to get away from the for-profit economy, because it's hard for for-profit businesses, small, sustainable for-profit businesses, to argue against the logic, but still stay for-profit, if you know what I mean. So I think the best thing that for-profit businesses that are trying to be sustainable can do is to start shifting, not only their logic and their rhetoric in terms of success is profit and we want to be profitable because that's what success is, but no, we see success as contributing to our community. We see success as meeting people's needs within ecological limits. And so changing that logic is important, and I see a lot of sustainable for-profit businesses doing that, but they also need to then think about the structural shift that corresponds to that. And so that's where it becomes important to start going in a not-for-profit direction. I mean, you can take steps in that direction. So for instance, start going towards a more worker cooperative model. So at least, even if you're still for-profit, it's distributed, it's a more democratic for-profit model, but eventually aiming to go all the way not-for-profit, I would say.
Thank you. Axel, do you have any questions?
I do. Very interesting topic. And what I'm wondering is that the traditional model of a free market is based on supply and demand curves, which basically tell us how producers and consumers value goods and services. And these intersect to decide the price of a good or service. But is this model applicable in a not-for-profit economy, but by, so to speak, giving more weight to, for example, social and environmental impacts rather than what direct profit can the company make? And if it's not applicable, what is lacking in the model? Sorry if it's a complicated question.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, because I am talking about a market economy, and you're talking about, well, how does the price discovery mechanism, for instance, how did the demand and supply curves act in this kind of market economy versus a capitalist market economy? So I think it's a very important question. And so the way that I think about it is that, yeah, for producers, first of all, because they're not only focused on profit, and they're not focused on profit as a goal in itself, but rather on meeting needs or protecting the environment, then they are more able and willing to make investments that allow them to do their business sustainably. And so that's one thing. So you would imagine that prices will go up from what we have now. If you can go out and buy a pair of jeans right now for 200 crowns or 20 euros or whatever, that's too cheap. We all know that that's too cheap, because it's clearly the workers haven't been paid enough. Clearly there's environmental exploitation behind that pair of jeans. There's all kinds of this hidden exploitation, right? So if we want businesses to include, not just include those costs, but pay workers fairly, and buy organic cotton to make their jeans and whatnot, then the prices for them are going to go up, and they'll have to raise their prices. So that's one thing. Then from the consumer side, we also need a larger social and cultural shift. And that's where I said it's necessary but not sufficient, because consumers have to also be willing to pay more. Consumers also have to be, so the mindset of both producers and consumers in a for-profit economy is that money is success. And so rational behavior is all about saving as much money as you can, making as much money. So if I'm a consumer and I pay more for a fair trade organic product, I'm kind of stupid in the for-profit economy. I'm behaving irrationally because I'm paying more than I should, or more than I would have to. So I think then that whole logic shifts. I mean, it's like, I'm willing to pay more because I know that this is doing good. This company is doing good with the profit that they're getting. So does that make sense? There's still like a price discovery mechanism in this market, but it's based around social benefit rather than how much money can I save as a consumer, how much money can they make as a business.
Yeah, it does make sense. And if I interpreted you correctly, it's still the same underlying structure of consumer demand meeting producer supply, but rather than that, the way we value things changes.
Yes, exactly. It's all, and then that's where like if the underlying theory of value becomes really important for understanding the economy and what do we think value is. And right now we think value is financial value, but in this sustainable not-for-profit economy, we'd be focusing on social and environmental value. And so also our demands as consumers would go down as a whole because we would be sharing more, we would be, growing more of our own food and meeting our needs in other ways than just shopping like we do now.
Yes, so I think one thing that you didn't mention is, I think it's important for you to answer is how you see the transition. How is it possible, and how can we make this transition from the for-profit economy to a not-for-profit?
Yeah, and this is a question that I get a lot, you can imagine. So I have many thoughts about how this transition can and should happen, and I will share those with you. But I also want to put those in a parentheses or give a bit of a disclaimer first, that I think that these kinds of transitions need to be decided and managed and planned democratically. That it's, even though I helped develop this model, I mean, I'm one of two people who developed this model. It's not just on the two of us to say exactly how the transition should go. That's very anti-democratic. So it's more about us putting the model out, throwing ideas out, and then hopefully people pick them up and democratically move for this. So some of the ways that I think about this is, often people think about top-down change. We need policies that force people and businesses to act in a certain way. Other people say, no, we need bottom-up change from grassroots and social movements. And the way that I see it, coming from a systems thinking background, is that it's sort of a feedback between those two. And I think it starts with the bottom up right now in most places, because there is this state of political capture where so many of our politicians are influenced heavily by these for-profit corporations. So we need a very strong social movement that pushes them out of their comfort zone. So we're not going to do this anymore. And we're armed with a model that is actually sustainable. We're armed with an alternative that we want. And so we want you to do this for us. And, because right now, a lot of our social movements are saying what they don't want, but they don't offer a lot of very concrete alternatives. So then it's easy for politicians and people in power to wriggle out and say, okay, well, you're not giving us any alternatives, so we're just going to kind of keep doing the same thing. So I think that's the power of having a concrete alternative vision. And then, push the policymakers, and then they can implement policies that take away the subsidies that large for-profit corporations are benefiting from, and they have an advantage in the market because of that. They can give funding, seed funding, to help start more not-for-profit businesses. They can even give some funding to help for-profit businesses transition to not-for-profits. There's a lot of different things that can happen on the policy level, but I think we need a strong social movement to push policymakers to implement those. And then you can do little things as a citizen and a consumer in your community, map out, identify who the not-for-profit businesses are around you, and start shifting your consumption and your support away from for-profit businesses and to not-for-profit businesses. So for instance, in Sweden, I have not-for-profit insurance. I shop at a not-for-profit grocery store. I have tried to shift. You can find not-for-profit banks, shift your money. So there's a lot that you can do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to give the word to Ellen now.
Yeah, I was wondering, as a follow-up question first, how do we as consumers find these not-for-profit banks or grocery stores or whatever it may be?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that actually is more challenging than it sounds, and it's more challenging than it should be. Because a lot of these not-for-profit businesses fly under the radar. They don't really call themselves not-for-profits because they're trying to be seen as businesses. And so you need to, and some for-profits kind of act like not-for-profits. And if they are actually acting like not-for-profits and putting all of their profit into a charity or something, then it's worth, shopping with them or supporting them. But so I've had to actually go into legal documents and annual reports and state registries to find out who owns businesses and stuff, or to get to the bottom of their legal structure. So one thing that I want, or I would encourage people to do, and I would like to do at some point, is to create directories. Somebody's got to do this research in the first place, but then, Stockholm could have a directory of not-for-profit businesses. And as the word spreads, the more not-for-profit businesses will sort of come out of the forest and say, oh, I'm here too. And then, we can all become more aware of this legal structure and which ones are around us. But that is a challenge, is just identifying them in the first place.
So like having a kind of a network where all of the not-for-profit businesses are gathered.
Yes, and I mean, so the shorthand, if you want to figure out if a business is not-for-profit today, just go on their website or call them and ask them if they can distribute profit to private owners. That's one quick question, and if they can, then they're for-profit, and if they can't, then they're not-for-profit.
Yeah, somebody should definitely develop that. Indeed.
Something I'm encouraging people to do. We're starting a social movement here, so we can start to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Axel, do you have a question?
Yeah. So I think you've mentioned in some of the articles that you've written that it's also important to take care that not-for-profits are democratic. And do you see a risk of a not-for-profit economy being more undemocratic than the current one? And how can we avoid those risks in that case?
I actually, and again, I might just be biased, but I don't see how the not-for-profit economy could be more, or I mean, less democratic than the for-profit economy is, just because there's those built-in tendencies in the for-profit economy to sort of hijack political processes for private financial gain. And that's not built into the DNA of not-for-profit structures. But I think that, you know, we do want to avoid the levels of market concentration that we have now in the for-profit economy. And we want to make sure that diverse voices are heard, you know, that, and this is inherent in the for-profit economy, but also the colonial era that we're still coming out of, basically, of not hearing everybody's voice, not taking all voices seriously. So I think that's an important aspect to bring into the economic system through business structures and everything else, trade agreements and everything. So.
Yes, thank you. So I'm gonna take a question now from the audience, and I'm just gonna read it now. I think this sounds great. Is there also like a solution for pensions? Since today's system is based on our pension money growing from investments in business for profit, would we need to find a completely different way of thinking about pensions?
In short, yes. So I think, you know, it's a great question, because it, you know, whoever asked this question caught on right away that in a not-for-profit economy, the stock market kind of goes away. So because there's no shares, there's no equity-based investment. So you can't own shares in that company, or at least individuals can't. You can imagine that not-for-profits own shares in each other. Maybe that's something interesting to imagine. But yeah, pensions. So, and this is a question I get asked a lot too. And I think that an important way to frame it is that we need to wean pensions off of, or transition pensions off of the stock market anyway, because the stock market is so speculative, it's so unstable, you know, there's bubbles everywhere because it's so speculative, that it's just it was a really horrible idea to put pensions into the stock market in the first place. That's my opinion. So we need to transition them anyways. And then how do we do that if we have this not-for-profit economy we want to move to? I could imagine doing it in steps. And one first step would be to transition pensions off of stocks onto bonds. Bonds are a debt-based form of investment that you can use to invest in not-for-profit businesses. So for instance, if I buy a bond for 5,000 crowns in your business, then you have to pay me back the 5,000 crowns plus a fair amount of interest, say like 5% interest or something. And then I don't own a piece of your business. So after you pay me that, we don't have anything financially, any financial connection anymore. You don't owe me any more money. So we could go from stock markets to bond markets, and that could actually help fuel the building up of a not-for-profit economy. And after that, I think, once we get the not-for-profit economy operating more fully, then we don't need pensions as much, if you think about it, because you don't have such high levels of inequality, and the market itself becomes a bit of a social safety net, because all of the businesses, the market itself is working to meet people's needs. It's working to help disadvantaged people and all the rest of it. So if the market becomes a social safety net, then you don't necessarily need a pension system. And part of our model is that you have shorter working weeks. So we work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week, for instance. And so if people are working 20-hour work weeks, have a more purpose-driven or more purposeful work, then they might also be happy to work later into life. So again, not as much need for pensions as we have right now, where people just want to get out of their jobs at these for-profit companies as soon as they can.
Yeah, thank you. Does either of you, Axel or Ellen, do you have a question, or is one that you think is interesting from the audience?
Yeah, I was wondering one thing that you talked a bit about before, and it's about success and how to measure success in a not-for-profit model. How would it be, and what should be measured that is more sustainable? And yeah, like we have GDP right now, or BNP in Swedish. How can we change this, and what should we change it to?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think, so there are three different levels that I usually think about this on, because, so there's the business level, where today, of course, business success is measured as profit. There's the national level where success is GDP, right? Like you mentioned, and there's the individual or household level where it's income. So that's the for-profit economy. All the success is measured in monetary terms. So in a not-for-profit economy, businesses are measuring their success in terms of social impact. And luckily, again, because we already have not-for-profit businesses, there are lots of ways that they've come up with for measuring their success and measuring their progress in achieving their social benefit missions. So for instance, home ground real estate that I showed earlier, that uses, its mission is to help people facing homelessness, might measure their success in terms of how many homeless people they've been able to help get into houses, or people who are about to become homeless, they help protect them from becoming homeless. So there are, ways of measuring that, even in numbers, but they don't have to be financial numbers. And then, of course, there's something to be said about having, annual reports with a lot of qualitative measures of success too, that, we also enrich the community by having workshops and that sort of thing, like Scenario 2030 is doing. Then with the national level, there's a lot of innovative accounting there too, like there's the Happy Planet Index. There's so much work that's been done for alternative measures of success for the national economy. And I think public health indicators are really important here, because we've been measuring public health for decades. So we have a lot of data that goes back decades, and we can compare historical data to now. That's one thing people like to say about GDP is like, oh, we have no alternatives because we don't have historical data with these other indicators. And it's like, yeah, we have public health data. And then when it comes to individual success, then of course we can measure, or we can think of our success as I do, and you probably do, in terms of your physical health, your personal relationships, your mental health, these sorts of things, not just how much money you're making.
Yeah. And the thing about changing how we value success, I actually was part of a project in questioning about 3,000 Nordic youth about what their opinions are on biodiversity. And one of the things that came out of it was specifically that we should reevaluate what does success mean, and more in terms of personal relations and those kinds of things, and not GDP growth. So I think it's really important to mention that.
Exactly. And then, there's a lot of important, again, if we think about the purpose of the economy, and right now the purpose of the for-profit economy is to make as much money as you can. But if we reframe the purpose of the economy for sustainability as meeting everyone's needs within the planetary boundaries, then you're going to measure that in very different ways.
Okay. Yeah, so another question from the audience. Do you think that a not-for-profit economy would be equally good or bad as a for-profit economy in creating jobs? And do we need to change our view and politics on the working life?
Yes, I think we need to radically change our views and politics on the working life, and especially this emphasis on jobs. One of the things that drives me crazy is how the public narrative gets so easily twisted and hijacked by, jobs. It's like, well, we have to keep letting Bill Gates get richer and richer, or Jeff Bezos, because they produce jobs, or, all of these things. We can't, tax Amazon more because they'll take their jobs somewhere else or something. So I think we have to really rethink that. that life is not just about having jobs. The economy is not just about having jobs. It's about meeting people's needs equitably. And it's not just the amount of jobs, it's the quality of jobs. It's the level of health benefits that we get from jobs. So again, going back to the meaning and purpose we derive from work, that's really important. So I think the not-for-profit economy provides a lot more meaning and purpose in work than the for-profit economy in broad terms. And so higher quality of jobs, and also, like I said earlier, a shorter working week. Because if we're sharing resources more, and we don't all need to buy tons of stuff, but we can share with our neighbors, share with our community, then we also don't need as much money. And we don't need to spend as much time working or shopping, and we can spend more of that time with loved ones, or doing fun hobbies, growing food, those kinds of things.
Yes. Ellen, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I'll also take one from the chat, which I find really interesting, and I'll just read it as it says. Are there limits to what you can do with this model? The pandemic has shown both the pros and cons of big pharma. It's hard to envision the rapid vaccine development without the pharma industry, but the profit motive has absolutely hindered a fair global distribution of vaccines. And I'm fully aware of root causes of pandemic with wildlife, humanity interaction, etc.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And obviously I've been thinking a lot about this going through the pandemic and seeing how horribly it's been dealt with by the for-profit companies, holding on to those patents so that they can get their profits and keeping, people's lives, and it's nothing new, because they've been, instead of developing cures for malaria, they've been putting their investment into solving male pattern baldness and erectile dysfunction for rich Western men, while people in the global South die. So that's definitely dysfunctional, having the profit motive in big pharma. And I actually disagree. So part of our economic myth that props up the for-profit economy is that innovation is spurred by the profit motive. And that goes back to human nature. We're mostly greedy and competitive. So the best way to motivate economic activity and innovation is with the profit motive. But I think that's a really just inaccurate and outdated myth. And I think most of the evidence supports that innovation comes from natural problem solving and creativity of humans. So we are natural problem solvers, and we're very creative. And so a lot of the pharmaceutical development, to take that example, is done by public universities and researchers who are publicly funded, or not for profit, basically. And then it's taken to market by these big pharma companies, these big for-profit companies, but it's not actually developed by them. So I think, then for a not-for-profit economy, we take that same pharmaceutical development model, which is public funding for a public good, and then we just take that for-profit middleman out of the equation, and we have not-for-profit pharmaceutical companies bringing it to market and selling it at a fair price, and making sure, then using all of the profit to make sure that it's available to everyone, rather than making a few handfuls of owners rich. So, and it goes across sectors. So if you think about the computers we're looking at right now, those were developed by public university researchers as well, and then taken to market by for-profit companies.
So yeah, to answer the question a bit more, are there any limits to what you can do with this model? That was also part of the question.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about that part. Thanks.
No worries.
I think there's limits to every model. I think, and that's why I don't see this as an end destination, the not-for-profit economy. I see it sort of as a feasible step away from the destructive for-profit economy we have now. And then, what's the next step after the not-for-profit economy? That's really exciting to think about, or even alongside the not-for-profit economy. There's all kinds of potential for the not-for-profit economy, because it's not it doesn't have this tendency to expand and take over everything. It would allow for a lot more diversity of different kinds of economies alongside it. So gift economies and care economies and all of these other economies you might hear about could coexist with it. So there are definitely limits to it. And I think those limits then could be sort of filled in by, or the gaps in it could be filled in by these other ideas that are out there, these other ideas and practices that are already out there.
Axel, do you want to have a question?
Of course, I have a lot of questions, but don't have that much time. But I'll choose one question at least, and it's when it comes to agriculture, it's often profit-driven. At least it's become so in recent centuries, and therefore food has become a commodity and something to be traded with globally. And as far as I know, I think I read somewhere that those who lack food the most are often those who also farm food themselves. And the reason that it is like that is because they have to export their food or sell it to afford other things. And my question is then, can not-for-profit economy decrease this commodification of food and distribute food more evenly across the globe?
Yeah, I think that the not-for-profit economy has a big, important role to play in making food more accessible. You know, we have 800 million people who are undernourished in the world right now, and a handful of billionaires on the other side of it. And it drives me nuts because with all of the surplus resources that we have and the food that is wasted, there's no need for those 800 million people to not have adequate nutrition. So I think a lot of that, like as you mentioned, is driven by the profit motive in food. So, you know, restaurants and food retailers and the agricultural system sort of overproduce on one side and then throw it out as waste because at least somebody paid for it and that's all that matters. Whereas in a not-for-profit economy, then, you know, that waste, knowing that other people are in need, would never actually be wasted. It would always be sort of cycled back to where it's needed the most. And the surplus made from that would also go back to making sure everybody, you know, people who are in a vulnerable situation are getting their basic needs met. So I think it's just more about having that distribution built into the way the economy functions. Rather than having a bunch of waste and accumulation on one side and then trying to somehow redistribute it.
Reasonable.
Okay, we're on our last 3 minutes. It's gone really fast, the time, I think. So, but it's a really interesting topic. Yeah, I guess maybe we can have like a very short last question. And I thought this question that came up was a bit nice. That do you experience that there is a growing number of researchers around non-profits, non-growth parts of the economy, or do you feel lonely?
That's a good question. No, I actually, I did feel lonely for a while, but I feel like this stuff is actually taking off really quickly now, which is exciting. I mean, I actually, as a post-growth not-for-profit researcher, I work too much these days, which I'm, you know, going back to working and having a shorter work week is ironic. But no, and part of it is because I'm getting so much interest. And so I really think that it's getting to the point where this thing is taking off on its own energy, and that's very exciting. And the post-growth research field I joined maybe 12 years ago has really taken off. And then the not-for-profit economy research is sort of following that path. So it's it's exciting. And it's been exciting to sort of see it do that. And I think it's growing faster and faster all the time. So that's also what gives me hope is, you know, we've experienced the contagion of viruses in the pandemic, but social movements are also contagious. And so they can spread really fast too. And I think it is. And ideas are contagious.
Thank you so much. That was a great way to end this discussion. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who listened, and to you, Jennifer, for telling about this model, and to Ellen and Axel also for having great questions. And so if you want to know more about Scenario 2030, you can go to our website at scenario2030.se, or check out our Facebook and Instagram. And you also can, you saw Jennifer Hinton's webpage, you should go there as well. And there are more podcasts, and if you just Google, you will find more on this not-for-profit. And any last words any of you want to say?
Well, just thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Axel and Elin. This has been a really fun discussion. And Sia, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's it for today. Bye.
Bye, everyone.